Hey guys, tonight we drift into a silent dawn over the tiled rooftops of Bursa, where you almost taste the violet mist swirling around the city's minarets. You blink, still half asleep, as the soft call to prayer slips through open windows and catches on the edges of your blankets. You're not some valiant sultan, you're just a curious listener, but you might find yourself itching to swap your pillowcase for a sumptuous silk dyed the shade of pomegranate you're about to meet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments so I can whisper this tale to fellow night owls worldwide. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey through history together. The sky shifts from ink to plum as the city stirs. You rise beside a slender girl named Eyes, her tousled hair brushing the wooden floor as she slips out of a humble stone cottage. She's 10, or maybe 11, time feels slippery here, and she pads barefoot toward a courtyard already humming with the clink of copper vats and the soft clatter of wooden looms. This is Bursa in the 14th century, the Ottomans' first grand capital until 1366, when Edirne would squeeze its way into the spotlight. Even so, the aroma of morning incense and freshly crushed madder root makes you believe nothing could ever top this place. Eyes inhales deeply, her eyes widening at the sight of pots brimming with bubbling liquids, saffron yellows, indigo blues rivaling the evening sky, and a curious crimson that seems to glow from within. You lean in, careful not to trip over a stray dye-stained towel, and you realize the dye workshops here are like living rainbows, churning out cloth destined for sultans' robes and caravan traders alike. It's a mainstream historical fact that Ottoman silk production in Bursa fueled trade across the Mediterranean, helping the empire amass wealth and influence far beyond Anatolia's rugged valleys. But here's the fringe tidbit: some dyers claim that if you whisper your secret wish into the dye vat at exactly dawn, the color holds more vibrancy, though modern scientists haven't quite figured out why. You can almost hear the pigments giggle at these whispered confessions. Eyes, ever the skeptic, wrinkles her nose at such superstitions, yet she can't help murmuring her own wish, something about discovering a hue that makes even peacocks jealous. You follow her to a low bench where she gingerly lifts a freshly dipped silken strip, the fabric dripping with the deepest carmine you've ever seen. Her fingers brush the wet threads as though coaxing a secret from the fibers. You watch the color bloom across the cloth, and it feels like magic, but you remind yourself that this was science long before microscopes, plant roots, metal mordants, and time-honed recipes handed down through generations of Ottoman families. As the sun peeks over the minaret's tip, the courtyard brightens. Eyes' mother emerges from a musty doorway, her hand stained purple from the previous night's work. She offers a gentle reprimand, "Don't spill that on your tunic, child," before guiding Eyes toward a crate of dried madder roots. You note how the roots are carefully stacked like ancient scrolls, each clump capable of dyeing yards of cloth. This scene feels as timeless as the earth itself, yet you're hyper-aware of the present. Your senses absorb the slight chill of morning, the distant bleat of sheep, even the sweet undertone of crushed pomegranate peels left in yesterday's vat. Still, you can't shake a niggling thought that scholars often explore. Historians still debate just how much agency women like Eyes wielded behind the scenes of imperial craft networks. Was she merely following scripts written by male guild masters, or did she, in her youthful curiosity, blaze new trails in Ottoman textile lore? The truth flutters just out of reach like a silken scarf caught on a breeze. You lean back on a low stone wall, watching Eyes tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear as she prepares to grind a handful of cochineal insects imported from distant Spain or perhaps Yemen. These tiny beetles promise a red more intense than any vegetable dye, and she treats them as precious as gemstones. You wonder if you'd be bold enough, at her age, to handle such secrets. But here you are, listening from across centuries, lulled by the gentle murmur of vats and the distant silhouettes of domes against dawn. The day's first labor is about to begin, but for now, you savor this moment of fragile calm before the dyes truly take hold and the world bursts into color. And as you lean back to watch Eyes' lean fingers crush those tiny insects into powder, you realize you're exactly where you need to be, on the cusp of a discovery that will tint history itself. The courtyard heats slowly, like a loaf of bread warming beside a stone hearth. By mid-morning, you can already smell the shift. sharp vinegar notes rising from fermented mordants, the soft musk of damp wool waiting its turn, and, just under that, the metallic tang of copper pots that seem to hold whole seasons inside them. You blink against the smoke curling off a nearby brazier, watching the artisans move with the same quiet rhythm they've followed for years. No wasted motion, no sudden bursts of speed. I squats beside her grandmother now, a woman with a spine like a spindle and knuckles tattooed with age. They work in unison, grinding roots into powder, weighing dried leaves, unfolding cloth over wooden rods that have been passed down like heirlooms. The tools aren't labeled, yet each bears the memory of 1,000 dye baths. One ladle with a missing handle. That's for the deep indigo. A small, pitted bowl stained orange. Reserved for saffron and turmeric. You smile at the invisible logic of it all, the silent rules you could only learn by doing. This workshop is no side hustle. Bursa's dyeing guilds are among the most powerful in the city. Mainstream historians agree that textile production, especially silk dyeing, was a cornerstone of Ottoman industry. These weren't casual weekend weavers, they were the empire's color makers, supplying everything from court robes to kaftans for the rising merchant class. Their work touched every layer of society, whether worn by bejeweled concubines or modest clerks bent over ink-stained ledgers. You glance at eyes, who's now helping twist skeins of silk through a hanging rack, letting gravity drain the last crimson droplets. It's slow, careful work. Each fiber must absorb not just the dye but the story behind it, the hours of foraging, the precise temperature of the bath, the moment the wind shifted and cooled the pots too soon. This isn't just chemistry, it's choreography. And here comes a quirky twist. In one corner, an apprentice is carefully feeding fig leaves into a vat of pale liquid. Why? Because somewhere along the line, someone discovered that fig tannins helped stabilize pale green hues when used with alum. No, it's not in your high school science textbook, but Ottoman dyers swore by it, and you know what? It works. You can practically see the silk shivering into a soft sage green as it slips into the brew. Smells a bit like burnt tea and honey, if you're wondering, but for eyes, this is all just background. Her focus is locked on a set of blueprints scratched into a leather-bound journal with a stick of charcoal. They're diagrams of pattern work for a new commission, something grand. Judging by the gold leaf flakes clinging to the page. Her grandmother leans over, murmuring about balance, about the importance of contrast. A robe must look good under candlelight and moonlight, she says. Even in a dream. The workshop is buzzing now. Outside, the alleys echo with merchants shouting over the clop of donkey hooves. Inside, the dye vats bubble like cauldrons at a witches' congress, each belching its own fragrant spell. There's excitement in the air, not because anything dramatic has happened, but because it might. You sense it in the way Ice checks her notes twice, and the way her grandmother lifts the cloth with reverence, as if unveiling a sacred relic, and you're right to notice it. Something is happening. Word has arrived, the local bay steward is stopping by tomorrow. He wants a custom batch of fabric for the prince's birthday, something bold but noble, something that says Ottoman royalty, without screaming it in 12 languages. You try to imagine what that looks like. A deep red trimmed with burnished copper? A twilight blue that shimmers green when the light shifts. The pressure tightens in the air like a pulled thread. Ice is still a child, but the older women trust her eye for color more than most apprentices 3 times her age. She has an instinct, a pulse in her fingertips that tells her when a pot is 2 degrees too hot, when a dye needs 30 seconds longer to set, when the rinse water is stealing just a bit too much brilliance. You see it when she frowns, mutters to herself, and adds just a single pinch more alum to the yellow vat. No one taught her that. She just knows, and while no one says it aloud, you're beginning to understand, she's the heart of this place. Not because she's perfect, but because she's curious. She questions everything. Why does indigo smell different after 3 days? Why does silk take dye better under moonlight? Why can't you use the purple pot on rainy days? The answers are sometimes scientific, sometimes superstitious, often both. But Ice asks anyway. You wander to the far edge of the workshop where a young man, maybe her older cousin, is stirring a vat of rusty orange. He's humming something tuneless, and when you ask what the dye is, he smirks. Peach pits, he says, then adds, and maybe a little apricot. Don't tell my uncle. I snorts. It's all peach, she mutters under her breath. You catch a flash of something, rivalry? Banter? Either way, you're drawn in. This isn't some isolated cottage industry, it's a whole ecosystem. Full of alliances and quiet competitions. And at the center of it all is color, not just as decoration, but as language, identity, currency. The day draws to a close. The pots are cooling, cloths hung to dry flap in the soft dusk breeze like tired flags after a long campaign. The scent of rosewater floats in from a neighboring window, mingling with burnt wood and warm wool. Ice curls beside the hearth with a bowl of lentil stew, her eyes darting over her dye journal even as her spoon idles in her hand. You sit nearby, the heat from the coals seeping into your bones. It's strange how restful this place is, how steady everything feels. But you know better. You can feel it coming, like a splash of red on a blank page. Something is going to shift. A dye, a technique, a mistake, or maybe a miracle. But for now, you exhale. Let the stillness settle over your shoulders like a soft wool shawl, dyed in the colors of secrets not yet told. The fire crackles low as the final stars fade from the Bursa sky, and you blink yourself back into I's world, still wrapped in the lingering warmth of burnt dye vats and yesterday's drying cloth. Morning returns like a whisper this time, gentle and gold-edged. You catch I's mid-stretch, standing on tiptoe to reach a battered tin of dried petals from the top shelf. She's barely awake, but already the gears are turning behind her eyes. Today isn't like the others, you feel it, don't you? That hush in the courtyard. That pause just before the thread tightens. Because today, I's past starts catching up with her. Not the distant past, but the quiet, tangled thread of family, the sort that wraps itself around ankles and pulls you back when you think you've stepped forward. She's the third generation of dyers in this family, maybe the fourth if you count the grumpy great-grandfather in the back room who mutters in his sleep and still insists he once dyed fabric with pure thunderstorm rain. He didn't. The tools, the recipes, the rituals, they're family heirlooms. And more than that, they're baggage. I's expected to carry all of it on her narrow shoulders, but nobody's ever asked if she actually wants to. You lean against a cracked pillar as I's mother joins her, a bundle of olive-dyed linen slung over one hip. Their exchange is wordless, just a glance, a nod, the practiced rhythm of two people who've worked together since I's could walk. You can't help noticing how her mother watches her. There's pride, yes. But also something sharper, like calculation. Maybe fear. The family name carries weight in this city. The House of Seven Vats, people whisper, named for the original 7 dye baths that I's grandmother once maintained alone during a particularly harsh winter. Historians still marvel at the resilience of artisan women during this period, especially given the patriarchal stranglehold over most formal guilds. Official records might omit their names, but you can bet your slippers they were there, elbow-deep in indigo, making the men look good. So, when Ice hesitates before adding the usual blend of crushed walnut husk and alum, her mother raises an eyebrow. That's not the recipe, she says. Ice doesn't answer. It's a small rebellion. No thunderclap, no throne pot. Just one girl refusing to repeat the same step as always. Instead, she reaches for a smaller vial, a pale green substance she's been hoarding. Crushed fern spores, maybe? Something she dried herself, alone in the hills weeks ago. You lean in, as if watching someone step onto a tightrope. She stirs the mixture gently, and the bath shifts color, not dramatically, just enough that the fabric absorbs it like a secret. You feel a little thrill, a whisper of danger. She's altering a tradition older than her mother's earrings. Not everyone would approve. Back in the house, her father clears his throat. He's not a dyer, not directly. He sells their finished cloth to merchants and negotiates with grumpy port officials. But his presence is like a ledger, measured, meticulous, hard to ignore. "The steward's arriving this afternoon," he says, without looking up from his scroll. "Don't embarrass us." OF. Nothing like family pressure to make you question your life choices before breakfast. Eyes glances down at her new mixture, her lips pressing into a thin line. You want to say something, it'll work, don't worry, but your voice would be smoke here. So you stay silent, watching the tension wrap itself around her like an invisible shawl. Now, here's the fringe bit. There's a legend in this family that once, generations ago, an ancestor created a dye so vibrant it never faded. Not even after 100 washings. They say it glowed faintly in moonlight, that it could only be made by combining 7 ingredients under a lunar eclipse. Totally impossible, right? And yet, there's a faded strip of cloth hanging above the family hearth, charcoal grey now, but when you look closely, you swear it still catches the light in ways it shouldn't. Eyes used to believe the tale. Now she treats it like a bedtime story for children. But deep down, well, maybe she still wonders. In the courtyard, the family begins their final preparations for the steward's arrival. Bowls are polished. Vats reheated. Finished bolts of cloth are rolled and tied with string dyed the palest yellow, saffron infused, naturally. I's task is clear: produce one flawless swath of silk dyed in their signature crimson. Not too dark, not too pink. It must sing, not shout. A red that says, you can trust this house with your money and your silk, but instead, I's hesitates again. She pulls her test strip, her little rebellion, out of the bath. The fabric shines with a strange undertone. At first, it seems crimson, like always, but then a flicker of bronze catches the light. It's richer. Earthier. You lean in closer. Is that moss? No. It's something else, unplaceable. Like a taste you remember from childhood but can't name, she decides to present it. Her grandmother frowns but says nothing. Her mother sighs, and her father gives her the kind of look that's equal parts disappointment and concern. But the steward is already climbing the stairs, flanked by 2 guards and a merchant with the world's most unfortunate mustache. You can almost hear I's heartbeat. The steward examines the cloth. His brows knit together. He doesn't speak. Then he folds it once, twice, and holds it to the light. His eyes widen, just barely. This is new, he says. Not the usual red. Everyone holds their breath. You'll deliver 10 bolts in this shade by the festival. A beat. Then he's gone, leaving behind only the scent of rose oil and bureaucratic stress. Eyes sags against the nearest pillar, eyes wide. She did it. She actually did it, but you know what's coming next, don't you? Success rarely whispers twice. You can almost feel the consequences creeping in, soft as moths on silk. There's no time to celebrate. 10 bolts. 1 week. And not just any cloth, that cloth. The cloth that shimmered bronze in the sunlight like a secret only I's knew. The courtyard, once filled with lazy midday quiet and the bubbling murmur of routine, now hums like a loom in full rhythm. Feet slap stone. Pots clatter. Thread stretch taut across drying racks that hadn't been touched since last spring. I stares at the test strip like it might whisper its recipe back to her. Because here's the kicker, she didn't write it down. Not exactly. She's got scattered notes, half-burned corners in her dye journal, a line or 2 written sideways across the margin of an old bread recipe, but no proper record. The exact proportions, the temperature, the soaking time? All of it lived in her hands that morning, and now it's already fading like steam on a copper lid. That's the curse of instinctual brilliance. Sometimes you forget your own magic. You trail behind her as she returns to the workshop, shoulders hunched, muttering ingredients under her breath like spells she only half remembers. Crushed pomegranate skin? Probably. Wild dock leaves? Maybe. Definitely not the usual sumac ratio. She plucks a handful of herbs from a hanging bundle and scowls as if daring them to reveal their secrets. Meanwhile, the rest of the family is vibrating with tension. Her mother's pacing between vats like a cat on hot tiles. Her father is deep in haggling negotiations with a silk merchant who insists the last batch was half a cubit too short. Her cousins won't stop whispering. One of them even hints, not very subtly, that maybe they should go back to the old recipe. You can see eyes bristle. But she says nothing. Just stirs. Let's pause for a second and zoom out, shall we? This isn't just about one dye batch. It's about what women like us represented in a structure not built for them. In Ottoman society, most artisan guilds were male-dominated, formally, at least. But here's the wild truth: women often ran these industries behind the scenes. They just didn't always get the title, or the coin, or the credit. So when a girl like us makes something new, something powerful, it threatens more than her cousin's pride. It rattles the bones of the old ways. By midday, she's got the first test batch bubbling. The courtyard smells like sour plum and copper now. It's not unpleasant, just sharp, like something ancient waking up. Ice leans close, eyes half-lidded, trying to read the steam like fortune-tellers read tea leaves. She dips a fresh skein of silk into the vat, lets it sit, lifts it out slowly, drip, 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 and stretches it in a light, too dull. More rust than red. Closer to dried blood than sunrise, she swears under her breath. And you wince in sympathy, but here comes a spark of joy. Her grandmother shuffles over with a crooked smile and a tiny jar in her gnarled hand. You didn't try the linden bark, she says, as if I should have obviously known this. The bronze lives in the bark. I stares, then laughs. That rare, startled kind of laugh you get when you realize someone's been watching you quietly from behind the curtain the whole time, and rooting for you anyway. You watch as she grinds the linden bark into powder with the side of a ceramic spoon and adds it to the vat. This time, the mixture darkens slowly, like a bruise blooming across the surface. She dips the silk again. Holds her breath. And there it is, that same deep, impossible red, with the bronze undertone that flickers just so when the light shifts. Not flashy. Not loud. Just right. They get to work in earnest now. The entire workshop slips into its old rhythm, faster this time, more purposeful. Fabric is soaked and wrung and dyed again. Siblings take turns hauling buckets. Even the grumbly great-grandfather stirs a pot from his stool, muttering something about the good old days when mordants had more bite. Eyes directs the whole process, her fingers stained dark from the dye, her journal now filled with careful notes, not guesses this time, but the real deal. She isn't just replicating the recipe, she's codifying it. Giving it structure. You wonder if she knows yet that this is the beginning of something far bigger than 10 bolts of silk. Now for the fringe tidbit you didn't expect, one of the base ingredients Eyes uses to fix the bronze hue. Snail slime. Yep. The slimy residue from a specific garden snail that only comes out after late spring rain. Apparently, it helps bind color to silk in a way alum alone never could. Her grandmother swears by it. Her mother gags. Eyes? She shrugs. If it works, it works. You don't look too closely at the jar. As the week unfolds, the courtyard transforms into a red-drenched dreamscape. Ropes strung overhead sag with drying bolts that shimmer in the breeze. The smell of vinegar and rosewater hangs heavy in the air. Every hand in the house is blistered, every back sore, but the mood has shifted from dread to something bordering on pride. And Eyes? She's still not sleeping much, but now it's from excitement, not panic. She catches you watching her and flashes a crooked grin, half exhausted, half electric. We might actually pull this off, she says, brushing a streak of crimson across her cheek without noticing. You want to tell her something. That this moment, this exact week, will be the one she remembers forever. Not the finished cloth, not the steward's approval. But this. The mess, the guessing, the accidents that turned into breakthroughs. The week she figured out how to make something truly her own, you don't say it. You just follow her gaze as it lifts toward the sky, where swallows arc between bolts of fabric like little messengers sent to approve the color. You wake up to the sound of a shuttle whirring. Not a loom, no, not quite, but the swift pass of someone moving through fabric, fast and practiced. Ice is already up, a smear of dye on her cheek and a tuft of fabric clenched in her teeth as she stretches a fresh bolt across the frame. She hasn't slept. Again, but there's no anxiety in her face today, only focus. The red worked. The bronze worked. The steward's order is nearly done. 7 bolts lie finished in the drying rack, glowing faintly in the early light like captured embers. Ice runs her hand over them like they're animals she raised herself, part pride, part disbelief. Still, tension simmers under the surface. Because now comes the part every artisan dreads: consistency. Anyone can make one brilliant bolt. But making 10 of them, each one matching the last like they're twins born minutes apart? That's the real test. Historians still debate how early Ottoman artisans managed such color precision without modern equipment. Some argue it was a matter of instinct sharpened over decades. Others suggest they kept meticulous recipe scrolls locked away in kitchen drawers or behind dye jars. Then there's the fringe theory, still whispered in certain remote workshops, that artisans fed a bit of each successful dye batch into the next, like bakers with sourdough starters. A living dye, if you will. No proof, of course. But Ice, standing in the corner with a dropper full of yesterday's bath, looks suspiciously like someone giving the theory a try, and the stakes? Higher than ever, word of her unusual red has spread. First it was the steward, then the merchant with the unfortunate mustache. Now it's whispers through the bazaar, couriers nudging each other in line, even a rumor that a foreign envoy, a Venetian, maybe, has seen the fabric and asked where it came from. I's father leans over the bolts like they're gold bricks. Double the price, he murmurs to himself, and add a waiting list. You feel her wince. She didn't ask for a waiting list. Today, she works alone. The family steps back, not out of laziness, but reverence. Or fear. Maybe both. The recipe she's using now has grown stranger. There's a powder she imports from a spice merchant who insists it's beetle shell from Persia. There's a root she slices open with a prayer whispered under her breath, not religious, exactly, more like a superstition passed down by dyers who never like to explain things. And, curiously, there's lemon peel. Not for color, but to neutralize a bitterness in the bath that she says feels wrong otherwise. She's not explaining herself anymore. And no one dares ask. You watch as she dips a final bolt and lifts it, the red dripping like the last drops of summer wine. It's richer this time. Slightly darker. She frowns, too much beetle, too much heat. She tries to adjust. Reworks the ratio. But every time she dips a bolt, the color shifts slightly. Still beautiful. But no longer exact. And as you've probably guessed, stewards don't like close enough. And here comes the twist. It turns out the steward is returning early. A messenger appears just after lunch, trailing dust and bad news. The envoy has requested a demonstration, and the steward, always one to impress his foreign guests, wants Ice to dye a bolt live. No prep. No second tries. You watch her face pale. That kind of request would rattle a master dyer with 50 years in the guild. For Ice, who's still technically an apprentice in everyone's eyes but her own, it's a thunderclap. The family scrambles. Her father nearly trips over a vat trying to tidy up. Her cousins start boiling fresh mordants. Her mother silently polishes the copper basins until they shine like coins. Ice, she sits down, just sits. In the middle of the chaos. You inch closer, half expecting a breakdown. But then she reaches behind a stack of fabrics and pulls out something you haven't seen before, an old, weather-warped scroll. Her grandmother's handwriting snakes across the parchment in loops and symbols. Not a recipe, exactly. More like a prayer. A reminder. The title, barely legible, reads, "For when the red runs away," and under it, 5 simple lines: "If the root splits wrong, let it rot another day. If the dye turns bitter, laughter sweetens it. And if the red fades, try singing to it." You snort. Singing to the dye? Seriously, but Ice is already humming. She hums low, off-key, the kind of tune a child makes up while playing pretend. The melody wraps around her as she prepares the bath again. It sounds silly, but something shifts. The steam rises in gentler swirls. The color deepens, then stabilizes. You stare, not sure whether to be charmed or unnerved. She dips the fabric. The red blooms again, not perfect, but real. You feel the change as if the courtyard itself exhales. And here's a side note for your sleepy brain: Ottoman dyers often worked by moonlight, not just because of cooler temperatures, but because some believed certain colors develop better under starlight. There's no hard proof, but some dyers swore that silver blue tones only held true when dyed on cloudless nights. Strange? Yes. But no stranger than I singing to fabric and watching it obey. By the time the steward arrives, the courtyard is pristine. The bolts lie in a neat row, weighted with stones to stop them from fluttering in the breeze. I stands at the vat like a priestess, ladle in hand, scarf pulled back from her hair. The envoy steps forward. He has that look foreign dignitaries always seem to have: equal parts bored, curious, and too well fed. His translator nods to Eyes. "You may begin." And she does. No speech. No introduction. Just motion, fluid, slow, unhurried. She adds the crushed bark, the powder, the lemon peel. She hums, softly. You barely notice the others watching. Not even the steward breathes too loudly. She dips the silk, lifts, waits, and there it is, the same color. The same shimmer. Maybe even deeper this time. The envoy smiles faintly. Nods once. That's it. But everyone in the courtyard knows what it means. Ice has passed the test, but she doesn't smile. Not yet, because deep inside, a question still coils like a ribbon. What comes next, now that they believe in me? You'd think after a triumph like that, Ice would finally get to rest. Kick back. Sip sherbet in the shade. Maybe gloat just a little. But no. The day after her live demonstration, she's already rinsing the copper vats again, alone, sleeves rolled, back to aching. Why? Because something's gnawing at her. See, success has its own flavor of unease. It's not the sharp panic of failure, but something softer, stickier. Like the taste of pomegranate left too long in your mouth, sweet, but with a bitter pit if you're not careful. You get the sense she's not worried they'll stop believing in her. She's worried they'll only believe in this one version of her. The red dye girl. The girl who did the bronze silk thing. A trick. A fluke, so she starts experimenting again. Not with red, not anymore. She's tasted that glory and wants something new. Something stranger. This time it's blue. Now, blue was no joke in the Ottoman world. Indigo came from India, expensive and temperamental. Woad was fickle. And the finest deep-sea indigo, the one that looked like night falling on velvet? That came from crushed leaves so rare and volatile they had to be fermented for weeks in clay pits lined with stale urine. Not even kidding. The smell alone could turn an apprentice celibate for life, but Ice isn't put off. She starts tinkering with local plants, alkanet root, fig leaves, even some weird lichen scraped off the side of a tombstone. She buys dried leaves from a toothless spice vendor who swears they came from Mount Kaf, the mythical range where birds speak Farsi and rivers run backward. Doubtful. But she buys it anyway, and here's a secret: she's doing all this at night, because the steward now sends couriers by day. Merchants are lining up. Neighbors are peeking over the garden wall. Everyone wants the red. The safe, proven, profitable red, but Eyes? She's chasing blue in the dark. It's during one of these midnight sessions, barefoot, stirring a pot over coals with only fireflies for company, that she burns her hand. Not badly, but enough to make her drop the cloth into the dye bath too early. She yelps, bites her lip, but then stops. The fabric is glowing, not glowing like light bulb, obviously. But something in the fire-damp dye, maybe a reaction to the lime she added from her grandmother's pickling jar, causes the color to flare a peculiar green-blue at the edges. Not quite turquoise. Not quite teal. Something else. Something unnamed. She scrambles to write it down. This time, she isn't trusting her instincts alone. Ratios. Ingredients. Timestamps. Even what moon phase it is, waxing gibbous, if you're curious. She notes everything. Her handwriting is a mess, but it's there, and that's when her cousin catches her, not the helpful one. The other one. The one who's been watching from a distance with narrowed eyes and arms always crossed like he's keeping a grudge warm under there. He doesn't say much, just snorts and says something like, "Should have quit while you were ahead." But she doesn't stop. The next morning, when everyone else is showing off bolts of red to another local noble, Eyes is bent over a smaller basin, trying to replicate that strange, flickering green-blue. She doesn't get it quite right. It's too green this time. Then too muddy. But the memory of that color haunts her. And you know how these things go. Once an artist sees a ghost shade, they can't rest until they chase it down. And now, for your offbeat tidbit, did you know some Ottoman dyers believed lightning could charge certain colors? There are records of entire dyeing sessions being rescheduled if a storm rolled through. Some even swore that fabrics dyed during thunderstorms held their hue longer. Eyes, if you're wondering, absolutely buys this. She even starts keeping an eye on the clouds and leaving pails of rainwater on the roof for charged rinsing. Her sister calls her a lunatic. Ice just smiles and keeps stirring. One day, the blue hits. It's not the strange glowing one, not yet, but it's rich. Deep. With that sea glass edge she's been craving. She hangs the cloth and watches it dry in the shade. No fading. No splotching. It holds. A good omen, but when she shows it to her father, he frowns. It's not red, he says flatly, and there it is, because here's the thing, success can trap you. The same red that won her applause now threatens to box her in. Everyone wants more of the same. Nobody's asking for her next idea. Nobody's ready for her to evolve. You watch as she lowers the blue cloth, nods, and walks away. Quiet. But not defeated. That night, her grandmother finds her in the courtyard, staring up at the stars like she's hoping they'll send her a dye recipe. She sits beside Eyes, passes her a warm cup of milk with clove and honey, and says simply, "You know, I had a shade once. A yellow. Everyone loved it. But it was never my favorite." Eyes blinks. "What was your favorite?" Her grandmother smiles. "One I never quite finished." You lie back on the rooftop tiles with her as silence folds around the moment. The city hums in the distance. Someone bangs a pot. A muezzin calls the late prayer. But here, above the red-dyed chaos and merchant demands and family noise, there's only a girl and her stubborn, blooming need to keep going, not to prove herself. Not anymore, just to see what else is possible. You've never seen so much color in one room. The courtyard has become a kaleidoscope. Red bolts hang beside bronze and ochre, blue still dripping beside odd little squares dyed in citrusy yellows, mulberry purples, and one absolutely cursed swatch of chartreuse that nobody talks about. Ice calls it her cemetery corner, where dyes go to die. And sometimes resurrect. It's been weeks since the envoy's visit. Orders have exploded. Her family's home now echoes with the sounds of commerce, cloth being weighed, copper coins counted, impatient knocks from buyers who don't understand how long a proper dye bath takes. Her father finally hired help. Apprentices. Boys from the neighboring district who think mordant is a type of dance move. One of them almost drank a rinse solution. Twice lies? She's exhausted, not burned out. Not yet. but definitely on the cusp of that peculiar fatigue that comes from getting exactly what you wanted and realizing it might just crush you. She's barely sleeping. Not because she has to stay up, but because her brain won't stop mixing colors in her dreams. Every time she closes her eyes, she sees charts, ratios, bark, acid, silk. That one time she tried dried apricots. A disaster. But now she's wondering if the skins might work better than the fruit itself. Still, some part of her is smiling through it, because there's something else happening now. Visitors, not the steward types. Not merchants, other women who saw the bolts in the marketplace and followed the threads back to her. One's a silk weaver who wants to learn how eyes fix the dye so it doesn't rub off. Another is an older widow who used to dye pillowcases before marriage made her forget how. There's even a Greek woman from Galata who insists she once saw a shade like eyes read in a monastery mural and wants to trade notes. They come with stories, questions, and hands that know labor. And eyes? She listens. She doesn't lecture. She shares. Carefully, at first. But more each day, you realize something funny. She's forming a guild. Not a real one, those require official recognition, charters, dues, hats probably, but a secret one. An informal sisterhood of pigment chasers, now, the mainstream historical note to slide in here. The Ottoman Empire had guilds, yes. Powerful ones. But many excluded women. In Istanbul, women could be bakers, silk sellers, even midwives with terrifying legal authority, but dyers? Not officially. Not unless a male relative vouched for them. Even then, they worked in the shadows of the trade, quietly innovating while the men collected credit. Historians still debate how much of early Ottoman dye innovation came from unnamed women, though some tax records hint at unusually high silk sales in areas with known female households. Coincidence? You decide. Back to the courtyard. It's a chaotic paradise now. Bits of thread pinned to walls. Experiment soaking in terracotta bowls. You swear someone's boiling onion skins in an old teapot. One woman hums as she grinds walnuts into a paste. Another sneaks dried figs into the snack stash. Eyes is in the middle, a blur of stained fingers and crooked smiles. She started keeping a journal, not the loose recipe notes anymore. A real book. Leather-bound, borrowed from a neighbor who traded it for 3 tiny pouches of that red for his wife's dowry cloth. Inside, she's sketching swatches. Scribbling ideas. Naming her colors. There's sundown copper, hearth smoke blue, rain-touched fig, and one called Quiet Vengeance, which is just a particularly moody brown. It's part documentation, part poetry. A pigment diary, but not everyone's thrilled. You guessed it, her cousin again. The one who always stands like he's posing for a judgmental coin. He corners her one morning, gestures at the growing piles of failed cloths, and mutters, "None of this is sellable." I shrugs. It wasn't for selling. You're wasting time. She doesn't answer, because by now, she knows the truth. Not all experiments are wasted. Some dyes need 3 failures to make a 4th masterpiece. Some shades only appear after steeping in a mistake. Fringe fact time? Some Ottoman dye makers believed certain plant roots wouldn't release their true color unless cut while whispering secrets. A metaphor, sure, but also possibly a sly nod to the fact that innovation thrives in privacy. In protection. In the safety to be wrong. And eyes? She's creating a space where that's allowed. You peek in one afternoon to find her and the Greek woman, knee-deep in half-dyed linens, giggling over a new shade that looks like gooseberry jam. They're not thinking about profit. Not this second. They're thinking about what might happen if they ferment the fig leaves longer. Or what would change if they boiled the silk in goat milk instead of water. Gross? Maybe. But Ice insists there's something in the proteins that makes the color cling better. Her father peers into the courtyard, squints at the mess, and sighs like a man who knows he's lost control but can't quite admit it. Later, Ice writes in her journal, color is not obedience. It's negotiation. Some hues bargain with you. Others arrive uninvited. And that, more than anything, is the heart of this chapter. She's no longer just dying for others, she's dying to discover, and if the courtyard looks like madness to outsiders, well, it wouldn't be the first time a genius was mistaken for a girl making soup. So here's the scene tonight. You're standing barefoot on a tiled floor, still warm from the day's sun, the air thick with the mingled scent of wet silk, crushed mint, and just the faintest hint of something sour, maybe vinegar, maybe pickled radish, who knows anymore. And all around you, the world has started to hum with possibility. Eyes is pacing again, not nervously, no, it's more of a thinker's pace. A loop worn into the garden path. One foot dragging just slightly because she stepped into a bramble patch earlier trying to harvest dyer's madder that escaped its pot. Her ankles are stained yellow. Her palms are blue. There's a smear of mulberry across her cheek, and honestly, she's never looked more at home, because she's got an idea, not for a new color, exactly. This time it's about how color behaves. See, the dyes, her dyes, have started doing strange things. The bronze red deepens over time, especially when exposed to morning light. The soft green from fig bark? It changes slightly if rinsed in water drawn from the well at dawn instead of midday. And that moody brown called quiet vengeance? Yeah, turns out it smells faintly of cloves if you let it hang beside basil plants for a week. She notices. Of course she notices, so now she's testing something even bolder. Layering. Layering colors sounds simple. Dip once in red, let it dry, then dip again in blue. Right, wrong, because each dye behaves like a petty noble, or jealous, temperamental, sometimes outright treacherous. Some bond. Others bleed. And once in a while, they fight in the fibers, leaving weird bruised patches or, once, a smoky ring that looked uncannily like a thumbprint. But Eyes is fascinated. She starts charting the overlaps. Red on gold. Gold on fig green. Blue on bone white. She discovers a dusky rose when she dips bronze over diluted onion skin yellow. She names it Lost Hour. Another, layered from saffron and pale indigo, turns a color that feels like a foggy sunrise. She just calls it Maybe. Now, the apprentice boys? They don't get it. They grumble about wasting silk. One even dares to mutter, just make more red. He's reassigned to water hauling duty for a week. Meanwhile, Eyes is in her element. She's combining not just dyes, but stories. One cloth tells of a moonlit garden, soft grey brushed with plum. Another whispers of temples and oranges and dusty heat. She starts giving the fabrics to her fellow guild women. No charge. Just quiet gifts, and suddenly, those gifts start showing up around the city. A merchant's wife wears a veil in dusky layers at the Friday market. A widow lines her prayer mat with a strange, sea-green cloth no one can name. A tea seller wraps her canisters in fig rust-dyed linen and swears sales have doubled. People start asking questions. Where is this coming from? What is this color? What name does it have? And here's the delicious little twist. Eyes won't say, not to be cruel. But because she doesn't know. Not really. These aren't textbook colors. There's no word for sun-warmed pomegranate peel dipped in well water before first light. And even if she tried, it'd just sound like a soup recipe. Instead, she leans into the mystery. She starts adding secret marks to the edges of her cloth, little embroidered symbols. A crescent. A leaf. Once, just a spiral. Are they signatures? Recipes? Codes? Historians still debate their meaning, especially since so few of them survive. But one thing's for sure, her cloth becomes desirable. Not because it's flawless, but because it feels alive. Now, time for your fringe fact of the night. In some corners of the Ottoman court, it was considered fashionable to wear garments that shifted mood in different lighting. Courtiers would position themselves under lanterns just so, hoping to reveal hidden threads or flashes of dye unseen by the casual eye. Entire outfits were engineered for reveal. There's even gossip in the palace records of a sultan who commissioned a robe that changed color when touched by rose water steam. Was it real? Who knows? But doesn't that sound like something I would try? And speaking of the palace, word spreads, not just among tea sellers and weavers, but across bridges, into salons, through the side doors of libraries, and whispered into the ears of women who know how to get things done. One day, a letter arrives, unmarked. Just a small, folded parchment with a pressed sprig of basil tucked inside. No signature. Just a time. A place. And one line, bring your hands. Leave your name. I smiles when she reads it. Her grandmother chuckles low in her throat, muttering something about finally getting the recognition she deserves. But eyes? She doesn't read it that way. She thinks, maybe, it's another woman. Someone else watching the world from behind layers of silk and politics, someone who caught a glimpse of maybe on a scarf and thought, I want to meet whoever dreamed this into being. So she goes, not alone, though. She brings 3 scraps of cloth, one red, one blue, and one that's still changing color. She tucks them into her sash, ties her sleeves tight, and steps into the next chapter with ink-stained fingers and the quiet defiance of someone who knows her name may be forgotten, but her colors never will be. It's just before dusk when you reach the garden gate. The air has shifted again, cooler now, with that Istanbul scent cocktail of burning olive oil, sea salt, and whatever the neighbors are cooking. Something garlicky, probably illegal, and absolutely delicious. I stands at the edge of the alley, clutching the folded parchment. Her pulse is oddly steady. Not calm exactly, but expectant. Like a drum roll under her skin, the address leads her to an estate tucked between a bathhouse and a decaying stone wall with fig trees erupting out of it. The kind of place where time folds in on itself. The door opens before she knocks, no words, just a nod from a tall woman with silver bangles stacked like armor. Inside, a courtyard garden where roses climb walls, basil vines hang heavy, and little glass lanterns sway gently from overhead lines. The scent of lavender clings to everything. The woman leads eyes through a hallway lined with rugs so fine she doesn't dare step on them with full heel. Then down stone steps, cool, winding, secretive, and there they are, a dozen women seated around a table long enough to host a feast but currently holding only cloth. Stacks of it. Bundles. Some silk, some cotton, a few pieces of raw, unspun wool. And every shade imaginable. They glance up at her, not suspiciously, not warmly, but curiously. Like scientists meeting a new specimen. Like tailors meeting a new cut. You sit down with her, breath barely held. The woman at the head nods once. Her scarf is dyed a green so rich it looks painted on. She says, without pleasantries, we hear you bend colors. Eyes blinks. I don't bend. I coax. A long silence, then soft laughter. It breaks the tension like a dropped peach. Someone passes her a swatch of cloth. Pale yellow. Too pale. Faded, brittle, sad. What would you do with this? Ice takes it gently, sniffs it. Rubs it between thumb and forefinger. Frowns. Then murmurs, reb oil. In mulberry bark. Add salt, but slow. Then layer with softened pomegranate peel and just a touch of indigo at the end. Another long silence. This one feels better. They begin to talk. Trade. Not just formulas, but tricks. Mistakes. Discoveries made by accident and those guarded like treasure. One woman swears by dried fig sap. Another insists that blue doesn't hold without shadow. The cloth must dry in partial shade, not full sun. Someone else talks about floating fabric in wine, not for color, but for softness. You realize what this is. It's not a guild. Not officially, it's older. This is a circle. A coven of creators. Women whose hands have shaped what men think appears by magic. Some are older, their eyes set deep with stories. Some are young, bold, with stained lips and sharper tongues. All of them work outside recognition, but their work? It moves everywhere. They're the invisible fingers behind wedding veils and burial wraps, behind curtains in pashas' homes and linens on merchant ships. They die for those who will never know their names. Eyes fits right in. She doesn't try to impress. She listens. She offers. Eventually, someone produces a scroll. Unfurls it on the table. A map? No, more like a web. Dots connected with drawn threads, color-coded, labeled with initials and obscure sigils. Contacts, the woman with the bangles explains. Friends of the cloth. Ice traces the lines. Recognizes a pattern. Realizes she's part of something much bigger than her little courtyard. She's stunned, not by the size of it, but by how quietly it's grown. The rest of the evening blurs into shadow and candlelight. They drink rosewater tea. Someone recites poetry that drips like syrup. They examine each other's swatches under a lamp held just so. One woman has brought cloth from Damascus dyed with ground saffron and something she won't name. Ice shares one of hers, the layered shade she called maybe. There's a collective pause. Not shock. Not envy. Just appreciation. Someone murmurs, that's a traveler's color. She doesn't ask what that means. She thinks she knows. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. Within the Ottoman Empire, there existed semi-secret trade networks run largely by women, especially in textiles and embroidery. While men dominated public guilds, women created informal economies behind veils, exchanging dyes, patterns, and knowledge within familial and religious circles. This decentralized system made it nearly impossible for male authorities to track exactly who was producing innovations, leading to gaps in records and, of course, a centuries-long mystery around figures like eyes. Fringe fact. In some dye circles, women believed that cloth remembered emotion. That a happy weaver produced softer, longer-lasting threads. Some would sing or hum over difficult pieces. A superstition, maybe. But one eye clearly shares. You can feel it in how she handles the fabric, like it's alive. Eventually, the meeting ends. There's no ceremony. No handshake, but when Eyes leaves, there's a cloth pouch in her sash, filled with dried leaves and what looks like volcanic ash. Try it with vinegar, one woman had whispered. But not too much, or it'll curse the fabric. Back in her own courtyard, she stares up at the stars. They're brighter tonight. Maybe it's just her mood. Maybe it's that quiet confidence that comes from realizing you're not alone in your weirdness. That there are others who stir dye with olive twigs and whisper to mordants like they're temperamental cats. And maybe, just maybe, color isn't about pigment at all. Maybe it's about community, about seeing and being seen, not in galleries or records, but in the folds of a scarf, in the hem of a robe, in the margins where women write their stories with thread and tint. Eyes picks up her journal and writes just one sentence. There are others. Morning again, and the light is soft, gold dust slanting through the fig leaves, settling on the damp flagstones like powdered sugar. You're standing just behind Eyes as she holds a piece of cloth to the sun. She turns it slowly between her fingers, watching how the color changes, how the shadows bend. She smiles to herself. It's done. Or rather, it's ready, a commission, not just from anyone. This one came through the back channels of the circle. Whispered. Delicate. No details given. Only the cloth's purpose, a birth wrap for a child who is not supposed to exist. Nobility adjacent, politics adjacent, very hush-hush. Payment, generous. But more importantly, trust. Eyes chooses the colors carefully. The base is a warm, nut brown, made from walnut hulls she'd dried herself last summer. Then, she adds a soft lilac undertone, brewed from fermented black carrot peel and fig bark, then layered, very gently, with pale saffron. The result? Something earthy and unexpected. A brown that blooms purple when warmed by skin. It feels ancient. Protective. Like a mother's humming voice before sleep, she works with reverence, no wasted movements. No oversteeping. She strains the dye through linen. Stirs with a carved spoon her grandmother once used. Hangs the cloth to dry not on the main line but on a cedar branch, because the old women say cedar blesses beginnings. She even sings just a little tune under her breath. Half nonsense, half lullaby. Something about a donkey and a cracked teapot. It makes her laugh. And laughter, she's convinced, gives fabric its softness. The wrap is finished by dusk, folded. Wrapped in oilskin. Delivered quietly by a boy who doesn't ask questions. And when it's gone, Ice doesn't speak for hours. She just sits in her courtyard, fingers stained again, eyes heavy. You'd think she'd be used to it by now, but every cloth still holds a piece of her. Here's your mainstream historical fact: birth wraps were often highly symbolic across Ottoman culture. While not officially recorded in legal ledgers, they were imbued with meanings, woven prayers for protection, fertility, or health. Mothers, midwives, and even palace concubines often commissioned special cloths for these secret ceremonies. The dyes mattered. The fibers mattered. Sometimes, even the maker mattered, especially if she was said to have blessed hands. I's name? Not on the record, but her work. It starts circulating, more commissions come in. Quiet at first, tea house regulars, bakers' wives, even a visiting storyteller who claims he wants a scarf dyed to look like fog on the Bosphorus. She gives him one she called drifting thought. He weeps. Loudly. It's awkward but sweet. Ice begins keeping small bundles by her door, samples, tests, scraps she's not ready to let go of. Some she sends with traders headed east. Some she hides between the pages of old herbals. Once, she sews a patch of velvet into the hem of her grandmother's prayer robe. No one notices for months. You start to see the pattern. She's building a hidden archive, not of names. Not even of formulas, although she records those too, cryptically, in symbols, half-poems, and fabric swatches attached with bits of horsehair, but mostly, it's stories, a cloth that bled when steamed. A blend that only worked when dyed under a full moon. A saffron gold that smelled like almonds, but only when rubbed against skin warmed by anger. Yes, she tested that herself, don't ask, and slowly, her space begins to shift. The courtyard fills with drying racks. The storeroom becomes a wall-to-wall display of herbs, roots, and mysterious jars labeled only with dates or feelings. The cat takes up residence in a basket of yellow rags and hisses if anyone tries to move her. Ice just shrugs. That basket's cursed now, she says cheerfully. Even the neighbors have noticed. They stop calling her that dye girl and start referring to her with some reverence. The colorist, one boy says, like she's a magician. The weaver's muse, says another. Ice winces at that one. I'm no muse, she mutters. I'm the loom. But even as her legend grows, something else begins to shift, pressure. She starts noticing strangers hanging too long by the dye pot when she's working in the market. One man lingers by her booth with oddly clean fingernails. Another woman touches a scarf twice, murmurs something in Persian, and disappears. She hears rumors of guild representatives sniffing around, of palace quartermasters sending agents into the back streets. Historians still debate whether a formal crackdown on independent women dyers ever truly materialized. Some records hint at sudden closures, fines, or disappearances. Others suggest the empire simply absorbed their work into the palace without credit, erasing names while preserving techniques. Either way, it's clear something shifts in the official tone of the time, less tolerance, more control. I senses it too. She starts working even more in secret. Only trusted apprentices are allowed near the mordants. She buries her recipe book in a clay jar under the lemon tree. She even experiments with decoy cloths, dyeing batches in plain, uninspired hues just to throw off nosy clients. At night, she writes, not formulas. Letters, dozens of them, some go to the other women in her circle. Others are clearly meant for strangers, future readers, maybe you. She signs them not with her name, but with a stitched symbol, a crescent enclosed in a spiral. I don't need to be remembered, she writes once. Just rediscovered. And with that, she begins preparing her final blend. One she's been thinking about for months. Maybe years. A dye that's not meant for market, or fashion, or even trade. It's meant to vanish, to leave behind only a whisper of color. A shadow of hue. Something so subtle, so achingly soft, it will look like the cloth was born with it. She names it memory, she brews it only once. It starts, as these things do, with a whisper, a scarf on the back of a chair. A curtain in the background of a painting. A sleeve brushing past a foreign ambassador's shoulder during an overly long negotiation about taxes and tulips. The color, soft, elusive, more felt than seen. A shade that shifts between rose and dust depending on the light, like the last flicker of sunset before night fully sets in. People start asking, who dyed that? No one answers with a name. Some say it came from Aleppo. Others, from a widow in Bursa. One merchant swears he got it in Cairo, but you can hear the lie in his voice. He's never even been to Cairo. Eyes watches this unfold with a strange mixture of amusement and melancholy. She's not hoarding the formula. She's left enough hints, enough cloth scraps and coded scribbles, that anyone who truly wants it might find their way. But she's not handing it over either. Some things, she believes, are earned through obsession. In her courtyard, the fig trees are heavier now. The air smells of mint and something darker, maybe marigold fermenting in the dye pots. She spends her afternoons slowly, like they're warm syrup. Grinding dried hibiscus petals with a flat stone. Sifting fine sand through her fingers to check for purity. Watching spiders spin perfect geometry above her head, the days stretch long. The work slows, and yet, it deepens. She's not creating for fashion now. Or clients, or even her own curiosity. She's crafting presence. She's trying to capture what it feels like to walk barefoot before dawn. To touch your own wrist after a bath. To listen to your mother hum while shelling peas. She's making colors that feel like moments. There's one especially odd batch she begins in secret, dyed not with plants or minerals, but with powdered eggshells mixed with tea and something called mourner's salt, which, according to one fringe circle of dyers, must be collected from the tears of someone grieving, mixed into a brine, and left under moonlight. Whether Eyes actually gets her hands on that exact salt remains unclear. Let's just say she does, and it involves an overly dramatic poet. The cloth turns out pale, not white. Not grey, just pale. But when worn, it absorbs body heat and deepens ever so slightly, like a blush. Eyes names it breath. She stores that one in her private drawer. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ottoman textiles were prized not only within the empire but also by foreign courts, especially for their color fastness and intricate designs. Some of the most celebrated colors were soft, complex tones that didn't shout their presence but instead revealed themselves slowly. A good dye wasn't just about brightness, it was about longevity, subtlety, and the ability to speak without words. And now, Eyes' colors are speaking louder than she ever intended, not in a showy way. Not in parades or royal halls, but in margins, in the wrapping cloth for a merchant's baby girl. In the prayer shawl of a woman who'd sworn off beauty until she saw something in the market that reminded her of her sister's laugh. In a single curtain in a caravan tent traveling across the Anatolian plateau, everywhere, little echoes, but with the echoes come the seekers. A man arrives in Eyes' neighborhood. Neatly dressed. Smiles too quickly. Says he's a collector of domestic arts. Claims to be interested in traditional weaving, dye methods, female contribution to Ottoman heritage. Uses phrases like fascinating local knowledge. You don't trust him. Neither does Eyes. She offers him one of her decoy scarves, dyed in bland rust and intentionally overboiled so it'll fade in 2 washes. He praises it like a fool. She smiles, but later that night, she burns the last few unrecorded swatches she had hidden in her walls, just in case. The circle begins to contract, not dissolve, just retreat. Like mist under sunlight, fewer gatherings. Messages pass through layered code, a string of dried berries tied with thread, a pomegranate placed on a step at dusk. One woman leaves Istanbul entirely. Another goes quiet after a strange visit from a palace official. Ice doesn't panic, she prepares. She begins transcribing her formulas into riddles. She stitches notes into the hems of tea towels. She sews a color wheel, coded by animal shapes, into a child's quilt she claims is just a gift. The courtyard becomes both studio and archive. She digs small compartments into her walls, lines them with wax, stores cloth and notes in oilskin pouches. She trains a stray dog to bark only at men in shoes too clean. It's surprisingly effective, and through it all, she keeps working, but it's different now, not frantic. Not fearful, more like defiant stillness. She dyes a robe the color of old parchment. Another, the faint blue of bathhouse steam. She's not trying to be remembered. But she's making sure she can't be fully erased. She knows history forgets quietly. It doesn't always storm in and destroy. Sometimes it just doesn't write you down. Lets your name slide off the paper. Keeps the cloth but loses the hands that dyed it, so she doesn't sign anything. She just keeps leaving breadcrumbs, a corner stitch here, a looped hem there. A shade no one can quite replicate without the missing ingredient, her way of watching the world. By now, even the apprentices know something is shifting. One of them asks, gently, "Are you planning to leave?" Ice just smiles, "No, love. I've already scattered." The nights grow longer. You notice it in the way the dye pots cool more quickly, how the fig tree's leaves curl at the edges, how the shadows from the courtyard walls stretch farther across the flagstones. Ice begins to wear thicker scarves, not because she's cold, but because she likes the weight of them. They drape like memories across her shoulders. Her hands are tired. They move slower, more deliberately. Each twist of thread, each swirl of liquid, each lifting of cloth, done with care. Like she's preserving something that can't quite be said out loud. You can almost hear the ticking of time in the silence between her tasks. She's not working less, she's working deeper. Lately, she's begun experimenting with metals again. Tin and copper, mostly. Iron, sometimes. But this time, she's combining them not to brighten colors, but to mute them, like turning down the volume on a song until only the rhythm remains. She says she wants to make colors that are like secrets. You can look at them, but you won't understand them unless you already know what you're seeing. There's a fringe theory she's toying with, that certain mineral combinations in cloth can affect dreams. She calls it dream charging. No one else in the circle believes it, but she's convinced. She's been testing it with a special quilt. Dyed in layers, one with madder, one with vinegar-steeped fig ash, and one final wash of her softest indigo. She's been sleeping under it herself, and every morning she writes a single sentence about what she dreamt. My mother sang from inside a jug of dye. A donkey argued with a spoon. I walked across a lake of velvet and never sank. She doesn't explain what the dreams mean. She just collects them, folds them up with little notes and symbols, and tucks them into the lining of the quilt itself. The fringe dyers, her old peers, would probably roll their eyes. But here's your mainstream historical fact. Across the Ottoman Empire, textiles were not only utilitarian or decorative. They were also believed, in some traditions, to carry spiritual or psychological properties. Color wasn't just color. It was emotion, intention, in some cases, even protection. Sufi mystics sometimes wore dyed garments that were thought to harmonize with certain spiritual states. Color, in short, had presence, and eyes. She's creating presence that lingers. That's why, when a scarf of hers ends up on the shoulder of a visiting Sufi teacher who doesn't know her, who just bought it off a street stall, you understand the kind of ripple she's making. He wears it during his sermon. Says he's never felt more clarified. You smile, because you remember how that scarf was dyed during a week when I couldn't stop laughing about a parrot that learned to say "stupid man" every time her neighbor passed. Cloth carries echoes, if you're listening, but not everyone's listening in the same way. Rumors arrive before the people do, that the guilds have petitioned for tighter oversight. That the palace is quietly reviewing independent women's operations. That foreign envoys are requesting samples for study, they say, but you know better. They want recipes. They want shortcuts. They want the end result without the story behind it. One day, Ice finds her dye pot tampered with. Someone's added water. The wrong water. It's subtle, but she knows. The batch is ruined. The cloth smells off. Not foul, just wrong. She doesn't yell. She doesn't accuse, she just switches her workspace. Again, now she works only by lamplight, indoors, late at night. The courtyard falls silent. Her neighbors assume she's resting more. But you know the truth. She's adjusting, adapting. Fading into the periphery before anyone can fully catch her, one evening, she invites her apprentices for tea, just tea. Nothing formal. No dyeing, no weaving, no lessons. But after the tea is poured, she slides a wooden box onto the table. It's small, slightly burned at one corner, and smells like saffron. Inside, not instructions. Not dyes. Not money, fabric, dozens of swatches, each wrapped in paper. Labeled only with a single word, first. Almost. Regret. Harvest. Begin. Salt. Enough, each apprentice gets one. She doesn't explain. She just smiles, and when one of them starts to cry, Ice pulls her into a hug and says, "You know how to read it, don't you?" They do. She's not just passing down technique. She's passing down language, even as her body slows, even as she begins refusing commissions she once would have eagerly taken, her influence grows. A merchant in Thessaloniki writes asking for a shade like the memory of fire. A baker's wife in Damascus requests the blue from that woman's scarf I saw once, the one who smelled like lemon. No one names Ice directly. But they name what she's made them feel, and that's better. The wind changes, it's subtle, but you sense it, the era is turning. The empire is adjusting again. Tastes shift. Silks flood the market. Factory-made dyes begin arriving from Europe, brighter, faster, synthetic. They shout. They don't whisper, people start wanting louder things. But Ice? She just keeps whispering, she watches the changes. Tries the synthetic dye once, hates it. It smells like chemicals and desperation. Like a promise made by someone who doesn't mean it, she mutters. That pot gets dumped. Instead, she doubles down on subtlety. She begins working with faded tones, sun-bleached, smoke-stained, air-kissed. Shades you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. She names one dust after music, another, the silence of thread. She knows the loud colors will win for a while, but she also knows they don't last. Not really. They don't get sewn into prayer robes. They don't end up hidden in wall compartments behind fig leaves. They don't make women weep in silence. And they certainly don't echo through the dreams of people still sleeping under her quilts, so she keeps working, quietly. Steadily. Softly, because that's how legacies work. They're not announced, they're felt. The city forgets in layers. You start to see it when the walls near the old dyer's quarter are whitewashed over, one by one, removing years of pigment tests and casual brush flicks. Street names change slightly, just a letter or two. Enough that an old woman looking for her childhood bakery now walks past it without realizing. New traders arrive. Some buy out the old families. Others don't even notice the loom marks still carved into the courtyard stones. The quiet erasure creeps in like fog, but Ice, she notices everything. She walks the same path every morning, through the alley that once held a spice merchant's cat, past the carved drain that used to smell like rosewater. She sees what's missing before anyone else realizes it's gone. She says things like there used to be a vine here, or that door was green, once, and no one believes her, but you do, because you remember. She starts cataloging things in her own way. Not in writing, paper feels too fragile now, but through cloth. She makes a series of small squares, each one a memory. They hang on a line in her workshop like flags of a country no one else lives in, a square the color of the jasmine that grew wild on the hammam wall, one in the muddy red of the man who brought her saffron and heartbreak in the same afternoon, a dull blue-gray that only appeared once, when a thunderstorm ruined her batch, but she kept it anyway. Because it looked like how she felt after her brother died, she calls it her invisible autobiography. She never explains it to visitors. It's not for them, but for you, she once whispered, "This is how I'll stay here." And she's not wrong. Here's your mainstream historical fact: many women artisans in the Ottoman Empire left few written records. Their techniques, traditions, and even names often disappeared from formal histories, but they persisted through objects. Quilts, embroidery, hand-woven cloth, these became vessels of memory, preservation, and resistance. Especially among women, textiles were language, lineage, and legacy, and eyes is fluent, even as her hands slow further, even as her eyes struggle in dim light, she keeps stitching. Sometimes she mixes her dyes too weak on purpose, letting the cloth take on that washed, remembered tone. "It should look like a dream someone's trying to hold on to," she says. You nod, pretending to understand. But later, as you run your fingers along the hem, it feels like a memory you didn't know you had. Visitors still come, less often now. Some come curious, some reverent. A few too loud, too polished, too eager to preserve what they never took the time to understand. Eyes entertains them politely, offers tea, smiles. But she gives them nothing real. One asks her, "Do you have a written copy of your dyes?" She tilts her head and says, "I am the copy." He doesn't get it. Another visitor, a younger woman, stays longer. Quiet, observant, asks nothing, just watches. And after a few days, she begins helping with the pots. Starts mimicking the rhythm of stirring without being told. One night, Eyes hands her a cloth swatch dyed in forget. No words. Just a nod. You know what that means. Eyes is beginning to choose. Not a single heir. She doesn't believe in that kind of legacy, but seeds. She's scattering seeds, little gestures, a sealed bundle slipped into the bag of a departing apprentice. A pressed marigold tucked into a stranger's scarf. A whisper passed to a baker's niece who once showed an uncanny instinct for mordant balance, each one a breadcrumb. She's making sure that the things she knows will outlive her, even if no one remembers her name. And here's the quirky tidbit. One of I's strangest habits is her belief that certain dyes like to be stored near others. She keeps cochineal next to lavender bark because she swears they get along. Indigo lives far from sumac, too competitive, she insists. To outsiders, it sounds like superstition. But for her, it's chemistry with a personality. She treats her dye pantry like a tea salon full of opinionated guests. You can't help but admire that, even as time pushes forward, faster now, her rhythm stays slow. She folds cloth the way you fold secrets. She dries her fingers with care, as if each touch matters. One evening, she walks with you to the edge of the neighborhood. It's quiet. The air is that strange between-season cool that makes your skin feel tender. She points to a laundry line where someone has hung out 3 scarves. One is hers. You recognize it instantly. First rain, dye before the fire, when she still hummed while she worked, still holding, she says, almost proud, and it is. The color hasn't faded. She leans on your arm a little longer than usual as you walk back. That night, she goes to bed early. Says she wants to listen to the wind. You check on her twice before sleeping yourself. Her windows are open. Her quilt, the dream-charged one, is pulled to her chin. You don't know this yet, but that's the last night she dyes anything. The next morning, she's up, yes. Smiling, yes, but the pots are all clean, every swatch put away. She spends her day baking bread. She hums again, and when you ask what she's working on next, she just says, "Oh, I think I've done enough for now." You believe her. You also don't, because if you listen closely to the fabric of this city, its prayer mats, its aprons, its curtains swaying in breeze, you still hear her, the whisper of color, the presence of presence, the dye that doesn't wash out, because it's soaked into the story. You start to feel her absence before she's even gone. It's not loud. No one mourns out loud. No one makes speeches. There's no monument erected, no historian scribbling down notes while squinting through spectacles. But the dye pots go untouched. The work table gathers a thin skin of dust. The cat that used to circle her ankles begins curling up on her cushion, waiting, and you keep stirring, because she taught you that dye doesn't wait. One of the apprentices takes over the courtyard studio, but no one dares change anything. Her footprints remain in the dried mud near the stone basin. Her chalk notes, half rubbed out, linger on the walls like unfinished poetry. The smell of madder root still rises from the cracks when the sun heats the stones just right. You don't realize it yet, but her real legacy is already unspooling, stitched into memory, into fabric, into the way your hands instinctively know how long to steep a marigold-dyed swatch before it feels done. Not looks. Feels. Historians still argue about whether independent Ottoman women dyers like Eyes were innovators or simply preservers of tradition. Whether they made scientific advancements or just stumbled on beauty by accident. Whether they deserve credit at all, but you're not concerned with that, because you remember her voice saying, if someone wants to argue with the color itself, let them. I'll be over here making the next shade. The neighborhood changes more quickly now. The house next door becomes a cafe. The courtyard across the way gets paved over. You watch children run past with toys that flash and beep, and for a moment, you feel like the world has been rinsed of the texture it once had. Then someone stops in front of your window. They point to the scarf on the line. One of Eyes. Faded but still glowing in a way that no factory dye ever could. They ask, where did that come from? You smile, you invite them in. Inside, the dye room is still modest. Clay pots. Worn stone. Bundles of herbs drying on a string across the ceiling like old musical notes. You begin telling them about tannins, about iron, about how onion skins can birth the softest of golds. But before any of that, you say the only thing that matters, she taught me this. And that's enough. That phrase, that small sentence, becomes the password passed between a growing circle of dyers. Most are women. Some are travelers who only stayed in the city for a season. Others are weavers, bakers, musicians, even one midwife who started dyeing baby wraps in the color of lullabies. She taught me this. The legacy spreads quietly. In some cities, dyers begin labeling their cloth swatches not by color, but by emotion. Beginning. Mischief. Kindness before anger. One workshop in Bursa claims they can recreate bitterness reversed, a dusty purple Eyes once made entirely by mistake after misreading a vinegar-to-ash ratio. No one can copy it perfectly, but that's the point, because you remember, she never aimed for perfection, she aimed for truth. And here's your mainstream historical fact, by the late Ottoman period, synthetic dyes became widespread. They were cheaper, faster, and more predictable than natural dyes. But many artisans, especially women working outside the guild system, chose to preserve traditional methods. Not out of nostalgia, but because they believed the natural process yielded richer meaning and deeper connection. You see that now more than ever, quieter dyes come back into fashion. At first it's a trickle, someone choosing a plum-tinted veil for their wedding, or requesting a tunic that smells faintly of walnut hulls. Then it becomes a wave. A scholar writes about the emotional resonance of handmade cloth. A singer commissions a shawl in the shade of her mother's lullaby. A merchant asks if it's possible to dye something in the feeling of forgiveness. You think Eyes would have laughed and then made it anyway. The apprentices scatter, as they always do. Some start studios. Others move far away. One sends a letter from Tunis saying she's begun teaching the local girls how to brew fig dye. Inside the envelope is a swatch. It smells like marigold and old paper. You cry, and you don't even try to explain why. Eyes doesn't become famous. Not in the way that fills textbooks or earns plaques. But one day, a cloth she dyed ends up in a museum, not because someone knew her name, but because a curator stopped, stared at the subtle red-washed ochre, and whispered, this feels like grief wrapped in kindness. The label just says, "Unknown Ottoman Artisan." Early 18th century, you're fine with that, because fame was never the goal, presence was, and oh, how present she remains. Here's your quirky tidbit: some of I's swatches, kept pressed in old books, begin to show faint imprints on the pages above them. Ghost colors. Like echoes made visible. One scholar insists it's due to chemical residue. Another swears it's spiritual. A third shrugs and says, maybe paper dreams. You like that one? Paper dreams. Feels right, because sometimes, when you lie in bed and close your eyes, you still see her hands moving. You still hear the sound of cloth swirling in water. The scent of iron and lavender. Her quiet hum when she knew something was working. And every now and then, you wake up knowing exactly what color your dreams were, and you know she'd approve. You trace your fingers along the edge of a faded shawl hanging in the back of the workshop, and suddenly you realize, this is it. All those secret dyes, hidden journals, midnight experiments, and whispered gatherings have led here, to a single moment when color isn't just pigment, but memory itself. You stand in the empty courtyard, the air cool and sweet with jasmine, and you feel her presence in every crack of stone, every glimmer of thread catching lantern light. This place used to be a workshop. Now it's a shrine. Not made of marble or gold, but of silks dyed in shades no one else could name. A dozen apprentices have scattered across the empire, each holding a fragment of her methods in their hands, some knowingly, some not. Street sellers still tuck tiny scraps into customers' bundles. Even palace tailors pinch her auburn hues into hidden linings of official robes. You see a senator's daughter brushing powder across her eyelids, unaware that the color was born beneath I's cautious fingers. You step closer to the oldest loom, its wood worn smooth by decades of use. You remember her voice, let the loom sing, don't make it shout. And here, today, the cloth does sing. Gentle refrains of memory, emotion, and quiet revolution. Mainstream historians agree that Ottoman textile innovation owed much to unheralded women artisans who wove knowledge through family lines and informal networks, yet their names rarely appear in official records. Their legacy survives not in dusty annals but in the very fabric of dynasties and bazaars alike. Yet even as you honor this truth, you feel the weight of absence. How many white pages, how many unnamed hands, how many vanished colors? I's never sought fame, she sought presence. And presence, you've learned, is woven into small gestures, an apprentice's secret mark, a tourist's fleeting admiration, a museum label that reads unknown Ottoman artisan. Those words sting. Anonymity can feel like erasure, but they also carry her spirit forward, unclaimed by time, open to interpretation. Here's a fringe whisper to tuck into your dreams. Some dye circles claim that certain colors can harbor traces of emotion, like a faint echo impressed on cloth. They say if you hold a piece under moonlight and hum her favorite tune, the one about the donkey and the teapot, you'll glimpse a stray memory in the fibers. It might be a fragment of her laughter, or the lingering taste of pomegranate mash, or the soft hush of her humming as she worked by lamplight. You pick up a small swatch pinned to the wall, memory, she called it. It glows with a subtle warmth, shifting from rose to dust depending on the angle. You close your eyes, tilt it to the breeze, and feel something flutter at the back of your throat. Maybe it's regret that so few knew her name. Maybe it's gratitude, grateful that her work lives on in hearts and threads. Or maybe it's hope that someone, someday, will unearth her recipes and, in doing so, rediscover her story. Historians still debate how much of late Ottoman diecraft was preserved by underground networks versus resurrected by later revivalists. Some argue modern natural dye movements have inadvertently reconstructed techniques lost for centuries. Others insist those movements dilute authenticity by romanticizing half-remembered lore. But you watch the courtyard lanterns flicker and know the truth isn't in textbooks, it's in the quiet glow of these textiles, in the way they breathe history into your fingertips. You fold the shawl slowly, as if folding time itself. The night presses close. A faint breeze lifts lilac petals from the vine overhead and sends them dancing across the stones. You tuck the shawl under your arm, stepping toward the street where the world carries on indifferent. But you, armed with color, memory, and a whispered promise, carry her legacy with you, and as you walk away, you murmur your own vow, to keep her shades alive, to teach each curious hand the names she never had, to let present speak louder than any name ever could. Slowly, the courtyard dims, and you lean back against the worn stone, feeling the hush that settles after a story's final note. The night sky unfurls overhead, deep and inviting, as if to cradle you in its vast, velvety arms. Each star feels like a punctuated breath, a soft exhale echoing across centuries to remind you of the countless hues ice-coaxed from root, shell, and dream. Here, in the gentle dark, your heartbeat slows to match the rhythm of history's still waters. You sense the layers of memory woven into every thread around you, echoes of laughter, tears, triumphs, and quiet acts of rebellion. You realize that while names may slip away, present remains, as steadfast as the loom's steady thrum. Let your eyelids grow heavy. Imagine the scent of crushed madder and honeyed saffron swirling together in your dreams. Picture a single strip of silk, dyed in the palest dawn, fluttering in a wind no one else can feel. Feel the warmth of that fabric against your skin, a whisper of color-carrying stories that refuse to be forgotten. In this hushed moment, let go of the world's demands. Rest in the knowledge that legacies are not measured in plaques or footnotes, but in the quiet spaces between breaths, in the trembling edge of a dream, in the soft glow of a memory draped across your heart. Now, let yourself drift. Let the night weave its own tapestry around you, stitch by gentle stitch. And as you slip away, carry with you the promise of presence, an unspoken vow that color, like love, endures long after words have faded.